December 15th, 1967. The sun is going down over the Ohio River, and the air is bitter cold. Rush hour in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Cars are inching across the Silver Bridge, heading home for the holidays. Inside those cars, the heaters are blasting. The radio is playing something forgettable. People are thinking about dinner, about gifts, about the weekend. But 50 feet above their heads, deep inside the massive steel suspension chain holding all that weight over the black water, something else is happening. Inside a single piece of forged metal, known to the builders as I-bar number 330, there is a flaw, a microscopic slip plane in the steel, no thicker than a human hair. It was born in a foundry in 1927, buried under layers of heavy gray paint, and it has been hiding in the dark for exactly 40 years. The temperature is dropping fast, and when steel gets this cold, it loses its ductility. It becomes brittle. The metal is pulling tight against the weight of the evening traffic, and the microscopic scratch is under more stress than it has been in decades. We will come back to that freezing piece of steel and the exact moment it lets go. But not yet, because to understand what happens when that scratch finally snaps, we have to look at the bridges that failed before it. When a massive structure falls into a river, the immediate human instinct is to look for a massive, obvious villain. A hurricane, a bomb, an overloaded truck. But this is not a story about a freak storm. This is not a story about a severely overweight convoy. This is not a story about a single negligent inspector taking a nap on the job. This is a story about what happens when an entire system teaches people to trust metal that is quietly rotting from the inside out. Every time a bridge collapses, it leaves behind a trail of physical clues. Twisted girders, snapped cables, shattered concrete. And the terrifying part is that the engineers of the next generation almost always read those clues, write them down in heavy government reports, and then build the next bridge with the exact same gap in their thinking. Let us go back to the summer of 1907. The St. Lawrence River in Quebec, Canada. The air smells of pine and cold river water, mixed with the sharp metallic tang of hot rivets. High above the water, hundreds of men are building what is supposed to be the longest cantilever bridge in the world. The chief engineer is a man named Theodore Cooper. He is 71 years old, highly respected and widely considered a genius of structural design. But Cooper is not standing on the bridge. He is sitting at a desk in New York, hundreds of miles away, managing the project by telegram. To save money on the massive stone piers in the river, Cooper makes a fateful decision. He extends the main span, making it longer and heavier. But in the rush of the project, the dead load calculations are never fully updated. Dead load is a simple concept. It is the physical weight of the bridge itself. The steel, the bolts, the wooden walkways. Because the span was extended, the steel members were now carrying more of their own weight than they were originally designed to hold. For weeks, the bridge reaches out over the river like a massive, heavy arm. The workers on site notice the steel bending slightly. Some of them mention it. But the reports that reach Cooper's desk in New York are reassuring, and he trusts the numbers on paper more than the eyes of the men in the field. On August 29th, the steel can no longer hold. The workers hear a sound first. Not a loud explosion, a deep, sickening groan echoing through the framework. The lower cords, pieces of steel as thick as tree trunks, begin to buckle. In a matter of seconds, the entire southern arm of the bridge twists, tears away from the main structure, and drops into the river below. 75 men fall with it. The records suggest that some of the workers had been warning about the bending steel for days, but the warnings never reached the right desk in time. 33 years later, the gap in engineering knowledge simply shifted from gravity to the air itself. November 1940, Washington State. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge has just opened to the public, and it is breathtaking, designed by a brilliant engineer named Moisseiff. The bridge is a masterpiece of deflection theory. Moisseiff believed that bridges should not fight nature with brute, heavy mass. They should be light, slender, and flexible. When you look at the Tacoma Narrows, it is a beautiful, pale gray ribbon suspended over the water. But Moisseiff made a critical choice in the design. Instead of using open trusses that allow the wind to pass through the structure, he used solid steel plate girders. The wind cannot pass through the bridge. It has to push against it. Almost immediately, drivers notice something strange. On windy days, the bridge moves. The steering wheels of their cars shake. The roadbed ripples under their tires. The locals jokingly call it galloping Gertie. But on November 7th, a wind of about 40 miles per hour hits the deck, and the movement changes. The bridge stops bouncing up and down and starts to twist. This is the birth of a terrifying phenomenon called aeroelastic flutter. It is a self-feeding feedback loop. The wind pushes the edge of the deck up. The deck twists. That new angle catches even more wind, which pushes the deck further. The structure is literally feeding its own destruction, amplifying the motion until the material reaches its absolute limit. If you watch the original black and white footage, it looks like a nightmare. The massive concrete roadbed waves like a flag in a hurricane. The asphalt splits down the middle. The suspension cables snap, whipping through the air. Finally, the center span shatters and plunges into the dark water of the Narrows. Moisseiff had treated the bridge as a static object sitting on the ground. He forgot that a long, slender bridge is essentially an airplane wing that happens to be tied to the earth. By the time we reach the middle of the 20th century, engineers believe they have finally solved the puzzle. They understand dead load. They understand wind tunnels and aeroelastic flutter. They start using modern, high-strength steel, welding the pieces together to create bridges that are lighter, cheaper, and stronger than anything built before. But the next oversight was hiding inside the metal itself. A mild autumn day in 1962, Melbourne, Australia, the King's Bridge. There is no storm. There is no heavy convoy of military trucks. A single car is driving across the span when a massive steel girder simply snaps. The sound is like a cannon shot, echoing across the Yarra River. The investigators are baffled. The math was perfect. The wind was calm. The load was light. They cut open the shattered steel and look at it under microscopes. And they discover a terrifying reality called brittle fracture. For centuries, bridges were built with wrought iron and rivets. If a microscopic crack started in riveted iron, the metal would stretch, deform, and tear slowly. The crack would naturally stop when it hit the next rivet hole. The material had a built-in forgiveness, but modern steel is welded. The welds make the bridge continuous, acting like a single, massive piece of glass. If a microscopic flaw exists in the weld, the physical stress concentrates at that exact, tiny point. Without rivets to stop it, the crack shoots through the high-strength steel at the speed of sound. The engineers had invented a stronger metal, but they had not yet figured out that stronger also meant less forgiving. If you are starting to look at the concrete and steel around you a little differently, hit the subscribe button. We are about to leave the era of hot rivets and wind tunnels and step into the modern age. an age where the failures are no longer just about gravity or wind. They are about human attention, microscopic drafting errors, and the slow, invisible rot of time itself. The year is 2007. Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Interstate 35 West Bridge crosses the Mississippi River. It is a massive, sweeping arch of green steel that carries nearly 150,000 cars every single day. It has stood there since the late 1960s. Generations of commuters have driven over it without a second thought. They drink their coffee. They tap the steering wheel. They trust the steel. But hidden inside the original blueprints, buried in a stack of drafting paper from 1967, is a mistake, a single tiny math error, a fraction of an inch. And it has been waiting in the dark for exactly 40 years. It is August 1st, 2007. The late afternoon sun is baking the asphalt, and the air is thick with the smell of hot tar and river mud. The bridge is undergoing repairs, and sitting directly on the deck, right above a critical steel joint, are massive piles of wet sand and gravel, construction material, heavy, dense, and soaking wet. The secret is a gusset plate, specifically a piece of steel designated as node U10. A gusset plate is essentially the bridge's knuckle. It is a thick sheet of steel that bolts the massive structural beams together. But back in 1967, the original drafting firm made a catastrophic math error. They designed the gusset plates at node U10 to be exactly half as thick as they actually needed to be. For 40 years, the bridge survived. The traffic was heavy, but the steel was just strong enough to carry the load. The error lay dormant in the filing cabinets. But on this August afternoon, the weight of the wet construction gravel pushes the undersized steel past its absolute physical limit. Survivors later describe a sound that does not belong on a highway. It sounds like a freight train derailing directly beneath their tires. The massive green steel arch shudders. The undersized gusset plate at node U10 tears in half. And because this bridge was built with a fracture-critical design, there is no backup. There is no alternate path for the weight. When one knuckle breaks, the entire arm drops. In a matter of seconds, a 4-lane highway simply ceases to exist. Cars slide forward into a massive, jagged hole. Concrete and steel plunge into the Mississippi River below. The National Transportation Safety Board later confirmed that the original design error had gone unnoticed through decades of inspections. The inspectors assumed the original math was correct, and nobody went back to check. But what happens when the decay is hiding in plain sight, and everyone just chooses not to look at it? August 14th, 2018. Genoa, Italy. A torrential Mediterranean rainstorm is hammering the coast. The sky is bruised purple, and the smell of ozone and wet pine hangs heavy in the valley. High above the city, the Polcevera Viaduct carries thousands of holiday travelers toward the coast. This bridge is a masterpiece of brutalist engineering, designed by the legendary Riccardo Morandi. Morandi was famous for his use of pre-stressed concrete. Instead of hanging the road from massive steel cables, he built giant A-shaped concrete pylons and pulled steel tension cables tight inside them, pouring concrete over the steel to lock it in place. Morandi believed his specific recipe for concrete was practically immortal. He assumed the thick gray shell would protect the vital steel tendons inside forever. He was wrong. Over 50 years, the relentless rain and the salty sea air slowly seeped into the microscopic pores of the concrete. A chemical process called carbonation took hold. The concrete slowly turned acidic, and that acid began to eat the steel cables from the inside out. The terrifying part is that the bridge, was literally bleeding. If you walked under the viaduct in the humid Italian summer, you could see thick, orange streaks of rust weeping out from the concrete pylons. It was a massive, visible warning sign. Engineers wrote reports about it. Maintenance crews patched the concrete, but the bridge had stood safely for half a century. The sheer longevity of the structure created a psychological trap. Normalcy bias took over. The politicians and the engineers assumed that, because it had not fallen yesterday, it would not fall today. Then the rainstorm hit. The water seeped into the cracked concrete, accelerating the stress on the rusted, thinned-out steel cables inside pylon number 9. Drivers on the bridge later reported hearing a deafening crack, like a massive tree snapping in a hurricane. 200 meters of the highway simply vanished into the fog and the rain. Cars were swallowed by the void. 43 people died. Let us go back to the freezing fog of the Ohio River. December 15th, 1967. The sun has fully set over Point Pleasant, and the temperature is plummeting past the freezing point. Inside the cars crawling across the Silver Bridge, the heaters are blasting, but 50 feet above the black water, the massive steel suspension chain is absorbing the brutal cold. And deep inside I-bar number 330, that microscopic slip plane, the flaw born in a foundry 40 years earlier, is finally out of time. When steel drops below freezing, it undergoes a physical transition. It loses its ductility. It stops being able to stretch and absorb stress, and it becomes brittle. The metal is already pulling tightly against the weight of the rush hour traffic. And in the bitter cold, the microscopic scratch can no longer hold the tension. It snaps. Survivors and witnesses on the riverbank later described a sound that made no sense in the winter air. A deafening crack, like a cannon shot, echoing across the river valley. In a fraction of a second, the massive suspension chain unspools. The main cables whip through the sky. The entire center span of the bridge simply lets go. 46 people are instantly plunged into the freezing, dark water of the Ohio River. The engineers who built the Silver Bridge designed a system with absolutely zero redundancy. There was no backup path for the weight. If one single piece of metal failed, the entire structure was mathematically guaranteed to fall. Every time you drive over a fracture-critical bridge, you are betting your life on thousands of individual connections holding perfectly. Forever, there is no safety net, just gravity, waiting for a single mistake. But there is a deeper trap hiding in this tragedy, a psychological one. The Silver Bridge had stood safely for nearly 40 years. Generations of locals had driven over it to get to work, to go to school, to visit family. When a bridge stands for that long, it stops being a machine and starts being a fact of nature. It becomes part of the landscape. This is a systemic trap known as normalcy bias. When a structure has survived for decades, the politicians, the maintenance crews, and the public simply assume it will survive for decades more. The sheer longevity of the bridge becomes the excuse to stop looking at it. Nobody was looking for a microscopic flaw inside a painted chain because the bridge had never fallen before. We trust the concrete and the steel around us because it was there yesterday. And it is there today. But the metal is always feeling the freeze, the salt, the wind, and the weight, and eventually it always answers. When you look back at every collapsed bridge we have walked through today, from the freezing waters of the Ohio River to the rain-swept concrete valleys of Genoa, a single truth emerges. Engineering is not just a battle against gravity and wind. It is a battle against our own arrogance and against the slow, invisible decay of the physical world. The implication of that truth is heavy. every single time you drive over an aging highway overpass or cross a massive suspension bridge on your daily commute, you are placing your life in the hands of ghosts. You are trusting a math equation written by someone who is likely dead, using steel that was forged in a foundry before you were even born. We like to look at our concrete and our steel and think of them as permanent monuments. But the reality is much colder. We do not build bridges to last forever. We build them to last just long enough for us to forget how they were made. Which of these failures, the wind, the drafting error, or the silent rust, made you look at your own city's infrastructure differently today? Tell me in the comments below. Because the next time you feel the tires of your car hum against the asphalt of a bridge, remember this: the metal is always listening, and eventually it always answers.